In 1989, Doctor Who, as far as the BBC were concerned, had passed its best days. It was a programme with enormous flexibility that could go anywhere and do anything, and had been very popular in the 1960s and 1970s. However, as we got further into the 1980s, it became clear the BBC were embarrassed by the show and didn't want it on TV. And as such, it was badly funded, which led to cheap production values, which is exactly why the BBC were embarrassed by it. By the 7th Doctor's third season, despite plans for a season 27 by script editor Andrew Cartmel, the BBC had decided this would be the end of Doctor Who. And as such, Survival was the last broadcast story of the classic series, and it proved to be very forward-thinking and progressive, written by feminist writer Rona Monro, who's so far the only writer to write for both the classic and modern series, returned later to write the 2017 story for Eaters of Light. And it would turn out Survival would lay the groundwork for the direction the rebooted series in 2005 with Christopher Eccleston's Ninth Doctor were going. But Survival ends up being an unintentionally fitting end to the classic series, due to the themes of its storyline and the way it progresses the character of Ace. The story involves the Doctor and Ace return to Ace's hometown of Perivale, where a number of young people have gone missing, including a number of Ace's closest friends, as for his mysterious black cat causing havoc, as Ace's friends have been transported to the planet of the cheetah people, and somehow the Master is involved. I think return to Ace's home was a smart move. Now, in the modern series, we're very much used to exploring a companion's home life, how it impacts their travels with the Doctor. But back in 1989, this had never been done before. In the original series, even a companion's home was set up and introduced upon their first appearance, as usually become lost in time and space with the Doctor, and upon their departure, either return home or settle down somewhere else. But we never learned much about the companions' lives before they met the Doctor. But when Ace was introduced, they were attempting to give her more depth as a character than a lot of the previous companions, with more stories that gave Ace a specific focus, rather than just helping the Doctor. Ace has been a character that we've now followed as an audience for a little over 2 seasons by this point, and she made for a rather refreshing change of pace after Molly Langford as Mel, who, by the end, just turned into a generic damsel in distress who needed to be rescued by the Doctor, as a number of companions had been in the classic era. The societal norms of gender were being challenged, and Ace represents that change, showing the younger viewers that girls can do anything and everything that boys can, with Ace taking on the image of a tomboy. Ace really is the first modern Doctor Who companion designed to develop and grow as a character, and her return to Perivale shows how much she has changed. There are several scenes in this story that explore the consequences of Ace leaving home and travelling with the Doctor, and the impact it's had on her family and her life, as it's mentioned that her mother had her listed as a missing person, and as far as her friends and family were concerned, Ace just disappeared, similar to the young people who went missing. But the story also shows how much Ace has been shaped by the Doctor and changed as a person, particularly when she is sent to the planet of the cheetah people, and she is reunited with her friends once again. Her friends are hopeless, they've given up, and are just trying to survive one day after the next. But Ace is the one who won't give in, and is determined to stand and fight. This is when it becomes apparent that the Doctor has had a major impact on Ace. When we first met Ace in Dragonfire, she was nothing more than a rebellious and moody teenager, who was still processing her grief and her pain in her life through violent and rebellious actions, and was rather self-centred. But the Doctor has managed to turn her into a better person. Ace's friends proved too much of a disappointment though. Mitch plays a rather creepy role as an enemy later in the story, but Sakantala Ramani as Srila, I'm pretty sure I butchered that name, is just bland, has no characterisation or much significant role to play in the story. As is Derek, played by David John, and you never get any sense of history or friendship between Ace and her friends that comes across as authentic or believable. But Ace is truly being pushed forward in a very progressive way through her relationship with Kara. LGBTQ plus representation is right now being pushed a lot in media, and came to significance in Doctor Who when Ross T. Davis rebooted the show in 2005. But you'll be forgiven for thinking that there would be no LGBTQ characters in the classic series of the show. And to some extent, you would be right. However, Rona Monro in 1989 pushed things as far as they would be allowed under BBC guidelines. The romantic subtext in the relationship between Ace and Kara is obvious. The way Ace sees Kara from across the pond, she is obviously very much romantically drawn to her, and the lesbian subtext of the scene is very much apparent. Kara is played by Lisa Bowman, who would later go on to be known for her work on Big Finish, playing Bernice Summerfield, a very popular ally of the Doctor's on audio. But long before that, she played Kara in Survival. Lisa Bowman very much embraces the female animal instincts of the character, and very much embraced the lifestyle of the cheetah people, as she's lost her humanity. So there is a tragedy and danger to her character as a predator. There is also a sympathy and sensitive and tender side to the character, which Ace relates to and sympathises with, which is where the subtext of the lesbian relationship comes from. It's very satisfying to see Kara come back to save Ace at the end of the story, and it brings the story full circle, as she sacrifices herself by refusing to align with the Master's mentality, viewpoints and wishes. And Ace is clearly emotionally affected, as the scene has a lot of emotional impact with the connection Ace and Kara have filmed over the story. The lesbian subtext of the story is never clarified on screen, but it was Rona Monro's intention. I think it adds to the story. At the time, it's something that went unnoticed by the BBC, but the LGBT community picks up on it. And luckily, now I've had a number of openly gay characters on Doctor Who, with Captain Jack Harkness being openly bi, and Bill Potts as an openly gay character. But Ace's struggle with herself in this story is what defines it as an important and significant story for her, because at the end of the day, this is a coming of age story. Ace has changed a lot during her time with the Doctor, and this story is the culmination of that, as she comes to terms with herself and who she is and where she fits into the universe. She comes home and she feels out of place. Her hometown and her friends have moved on without her, and she has moved on from them and her life as a teenager. This story sees Ace challenged as she has to overcome her more violent tendencies. Ace has a habit of resorting to violence with Nitro 9, which is her go-to solution for everything. However, she can't do that in this story, as she is faced with a situation in this story where if she submits to fighting, she will become one of the cheetah people, and has to learn how to control herself, how to solve things peacefully and calmly like an adult, as violent emotions fuel the explosions, and it even has control over the Master. We are human beings, we are animals, and we are born with animal instincts. But we have it in us to learn how to control them and rise above them, and rise above the emotions and the instincts of a child, which is what Mitch fails to do in this story, as he becomes lost to the cheetah people. Ace was caught up by the hunt, and we see a great emotional performance from Sophie Aldred as Ace in episode 3, with a great conflicted character flipping between her human side and her animal instincts. By the end of the story, Ace has gone on a great character journey as she accepts herself, that she has moved on, and that Perivale is no longer home, as she accepts the Doctor, the TARDIS, and the limitless world of all of time and space as a home. Sadly, this was the last time we would see Ace on television, which is a shame, as they had a great plan that the Doctor was testing her to see if she was fit to join the Time Lord Academy on Gallifrey, which would have been fantastic to see. What I love most about the coming of age side of this story is it feels like the perfect way to end the classic series. The audience who have been watching the show when it started in 1963, had now grown up. They were adults with real lives and real responsibilities in the real world. They had grown up with Doctor Who all their lives. Therefore, it feels remarkably fitting to tell an authentic story about growing up and moving on from childhood. And if Doctor Who was going to end, I'm glad this was the last story I picked to tell, because it's incredibly, unintentionally fitting. But this story also had a number of other interesting themes, dilemmas, and ideas. A bulk of the story is set on a council estate in London and deals with the struggle of the working class citizens in the 1980s, with remarks made about the survival of the fittest mentality and that only the strongest survive, which is a key theme throughout the story. This is due to the fact that this story deals with and tackles the political landscape of the time. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at the time this story was both made and broadcast. Therefore, Thatcherism was a major concern, and this story was made as a very clear critique of the conservative right-wing government at the time from Rona Monro, who was a very clear left-wing liberal. Margaret Thatcher's policies were based upon creating a new Britain and very much promoted capitalism, rather than battling it, which had very harmful effects on the working class. A lot of the mentality of Thatcherism is found in a lot of the characters in this story, which is why I wanted to talk about Patterson next, played by Julian Holloway. Patterson is a very tough military character with a harsh exterior, incredibly tough characteristics, and a violent nature, who believes in the survival of the fittest mentality. He believes that in a harsh environment where only the strongest survive. Julian Holloway plays his character to great effect with an uncompromising personality, and not approving of the Doctor and Ace, and being unimpressed by the plans of the Cheetah people. His beliefs very much reflect the world which Thatcher had created, which were difficult times for the working class, with the privatisation of workforces, less government spending, lower taxes for the upper class, and less intervention in the economy in the early days of Thatcher's government, preferring to let the working class fend for themselves, and with decisions that bettered the economy rather than the working class, which caused mass unemployment, which had already become a problem. The mentality of letting working class people fend in a harsher environment for themselves is very much reflected and shown throughout the story, showing young, naive people while struggling, forced to survive on the planet of the Cheetah people, and forced to fend for themselves, as they face resorting to their animal instincts. It shows a world with no protection, and no safety, and no barriers to protect you, which very much reflects the time. Through this, Patterson's views are challenged, as his no compromise in nature proves to be useless on the planet of the Cheetah people, where he is forced to confront the idea that his aggressive style can't solve every problem. Sometimes you have to face things as an intellectual, but he can't deal with this, so he denies the whole experience, as he is tragically killed by Mitch. Patterson is by no means meant to be a Thatcher supporter, but he does represent a lot of her ideas and her aggressive and no compromising mentality, and shows that only by listening and responding and trying to do good, that we can really help people, and we can really change things for the better, rather than aggressively trying to fight and viewing everyone as an enemy as Thatcher did, causing further division and conflict. Patterson is out of touch with a lack of compassion and care for people, as Thatcher had become by the end of her time as Prime Minister, which was what ultimately led to her downfall. The world of the Cheetah people, and what the people of Earth have been drawn to and what they have become, represents the danger in what Britain could become under Thatcherism, in a cruel world where we are reliant upon ourselves. Now let's talk about the portrayal of the Master, played by Anthony Ainley. For the most part, I really don't like Anthony Ainley's run as the Master. It just felt like a cartoonish pantomime version of Roger Gardner's Master, and much more of a parody version of the character I could never really take seriously. However, in this story, we have much more of a sinister and conflicted take on the character, who works really well, and I really enjoyed his chemistry with the Seventh Doctor. The Master's yellow eyes, as he keeps an eye on Earth, gives him a sinister presence throughout the first episode of the story. But after he is revealed at the end of episode 1, Anthony Ainley is a lot more subdued in his portrayal, with a sinister sense of fear and a great sense of dominance. Throughout the story, the Master and the Doctor are the two intellectual characters and two figures of control who are able to control their basic instincts the best. But even the Master struggles, which shows that nobody is above the power. The Master has always been hell-bent on control and domination and the mastery of the universe, but willing to do anything for the sake of his own survival. He manages to keep this evil power under his control to some extent. But several points in the story, we see the Master howling and struggling for intellectual control over his own body, and struggling with an emotionally and physically conflicted character, which brings a very strong performance from Anthony Ainley's Master. I love the way the story shows the cunning Master versus the primitive creature, which is consuming the soul of the Master, who is still power hungry. It shows him as a figure of cruelty, killing Kara, but despite recognising the key dangers of the power and control of the cheetah people taking him over, the Master is greedy and power hungry, and determined to take control of it for himself, and use it for his own desire for power. I think Midge very much acts as the Master's henchman in episode 3, where he becomes an animal character who has succumbed to the cheetah people virus and lost a lot of his humanity. Midge is played by Will Barron, where he plays a very tough character with a very clear presence and threat, as he kills Patterson, and his yellow eyes give him a slightly creepy and sinister vibe with an enjoyment of evil that I enjoy in the character, and a clear sense of tragedy. The cats in this story are very creepy with a very sinister presence. Keep an eye on the council estate, transporting young people to the planet of the cheetah people. I love how this story preys on the fear and dislike of cats as these violent and aggressive, self-reliant creatures of nature. I think it's very effective, but unfortunately I think the puppet is rather cheap and unconvincing. I like the animalistic and violent predators of the cheetah people, which shows a violent, alien and incredibly dangerous culture in my opinion, and they prove to be a great threat as villains. Alan Waring directed this story, who also directed The Greatest Show in the Galaxy and Ghostlight, and does a great job at showing the story from the cat's point of view and from the watchful point of view of the Master, giving the villains a sinister presence, and the planet of the cheetah people is made to feel like a very hostile environment with great threat. It's just unfortunate that some of the production values of the story do let certain elements of it down. Now let's take a look at Sylvester McCoy's The Seventh Doctor, who for me is a tragically underrated Doctor, one of my personal favourite versions of the character. Unfortunately, this will be the last time he would play the Doctor before he regenerated in the 1996 TV movie. What made the Seventh Doctor so special was his incredibly cunning and very mysterious nature. He's generally regarded as being a very silly Doctor, but I always find that very unfair. The Doctor takes Ace back home and he immediately knows that something is wrong when he sees cats everywhere acting incredibly mysteriously and strangely picking up on tracks of horses, and he begins collecting cat food and placing it on the street. He becomes very suspicious of all disappearances of Ace's friends. But Ace clearly doesn't pick up on the mysterious situation in the same way that the Doctor does. When the Doctor interacts with Patterson, he is clearly abnormal and alien, with a clear oddity to his character, with Patterson clearly disapproving of his character. But I enjoy seeing Sylvester McCoy's Doctor go up against the Master. The Doctor is a cunning character who plans everything like a chessboard, knowing the situation like the back of his hand, and knowing perfectly how to execute his plan. But seeing the Doctor go up against the Master sees him go up against an equal who knows who the Doctor is and knows all his tricks. The Doctor has a clear disgust for the Master. He has a hatred for him. He was clearly once a friend, but he has since lost any kind of love for him and is rather ruthless towards him. The Doctor hates violence and prefers to settle everything peacefully as a rather wizardly character, attempting to turn Ace into a much more diplomatic character, less reliant on violence. The Doctor is over the story, frustratingly trying to control Ace and her friends from resorting to violence. But we see that the Doctor is clearly not immune to it, and we see him battle the Master at the end and begin to suffer under the mercy of the Cheetah people until he rejects it. But I have to admit, Sylvester McCoy's acting is a little over-exaggerated in this scene. So overall, what kind of impact did this story have? Well, at the time, the story didn't have much of an impact because it was the last story of the classic series, when the show was suffering from low ratings. But on reflection, I think it's very strong and one of the best of the 7th Doctor era. Looking back, knowing this is the end of the show, it's the perfect story to end the classic series. It's a very progressive story, turning Ace into a bisexual character with the lesbian subtext with Kara, which is very powerful, but also manages to create the foundation of the 2005 series with some great character development for Ace, in a great coming-of-age story, as Ace comes home to discover the consequences of her leaving and abandoning her family to travel with the Doctor. As over the story, she accepts the Doctor and the TARDIS as her home, and moves on from her life and her home as a child, paralleling the journey of the audience from 1963, who have now grown up. He also manages to effectively parallel the political conflict of the time under Margaret Thatcher's government with the elitist survival of the fittest mentality, with actions that put the working class in a very hostile environment. It's a story that shows the clear dangers of reverting to our animal instincts, and it shows we can rise above our violent instincts and use our intelligence to solve our problems as pacifists. It's a story with flaws, as it suffers from a few weak guest characters and low production values, but clear scares and great reflection of the political conflict of the time, and the perfect coming-of-age story to end the classic run of Doctor Who.